What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Film Room. I've kind of been working my way through some of the top rookies from last year that are about to start their sophomore seasons in the NFL, and I gotta say that studying Joey Bosa has been really hard for me for the past week. He's a very tough evaluation because a lot of the things that you see on tape make you say, wow, this kid's a stud. He's going to be dominant for a decade and be a perennial All-Pro. But then you see other things that kind of throw up big red flags and make you think that his incredible production last year might have been a little bit misleading. Before I get into that kind of negative hot takeness though, let's go through what I really liked about watching him and why I think he can be a very successful player in this league. For starters, he might be the most technically polished defensive end prospect that I've scouted in the last several years coming out of college. His father was a former first-round pick at defensive end for the Dolphins, and you can tell in his play style that Joey has been developed like a pro pass rusher for his entire life by his dad. He has a mastery of some of the technical nuances of pass rushing that even longtime veterans in this league still struggle with. Like, even as a rookie, I already consider Bosa's pass rushing reps to be teaching tape quality. Every young defensive end watching this video right now, at any level, needs to watch Joey Bosa play football because I promise that you will learn something new. He so effortlessly strings together head fakes, jabs, swipes, rips, swims, and spins that offensive tackles don't know what he's going to do because he can attack them in so many different ways. And on top of that, how he links together his feet, hips, and hands into one fluid motion while turning the corner is just stunningly beautiful. Or at least it is to me because I'm a football nerd and I love that kind of shit. But really, his technical precision is a lot of fun to watch. And on that note, I've talked a lot in the past about how important hip torque is to an edge rusher. It is, without a doubt, one of the most critical elements of proper pass rushing technique when you're turning the corner. Your body's going to go wherever your hips are pointed, so if you're coming off the edge and trying to flatten down to finish the rush, if your hips are not pointed at the quarterback, you're just going to get washed around the back of the pocket and your rush will be wasted. Knowing that, Bosa always makes it a point to keep his hips pointed at the quarterback as he's rounding the corner so that he can flatten down as fast as possible and not need to waste any steps cranking his body around. This snap that I've been showing you from the fourth quarter of the Titans game last year is a perfect example of that. Bosa engages fellow first-round rookie Jack Conklin with a jab with his inside arm, and at the same time Bosa is holding his outside arm up as a shield for his chest. He's ready to use that hand to parry any punches from Conklin's outside hand, also known as the low hand. If you've watched some of my previous episodes, you'll remember that the inside hand of an offensive lineman is the high hand, and the outside hand is the low hand. Conklin does try to throw a punch with that low hand, and I think he's trying to place it on Bosa's shoulder to kind of slow his momentum around the corner, but he misses that punch. So when Bosa's pushing back on Conklin with his own punch, Conklin really has no good point of contact to anchor against it. At the same time, go back to watching Bosa's hips. He cranks them around inside and sidesteps around the corner so that by the time he's clearing himself from Conklin's reach, his hips are already pointing at the quarterback and he can immediately flatten his rush down to where he wants to go. A lot of young defensive ends do not roll those hips and flatten the rush until after they beat the tackle's punch, and it costs them a lot of valuable time. But Bosa rolls his hips to flatten simultaneously as he beats the tackle's punch so he can get to the quarterback as fast as possible once he's clear. Conklin has no choice but to hold Bosa and drag him to the ground out of panic, and lucky for him it went uncalled and the Titans got a touchdown on the play. But make no mistake about it, this touchdown should not have happened and this should have been a holding call. Bosa won the rep easily because of his hand usage and his hips, but Tennessee got extremely lucky and it ended up not mattering. Every rush you see from Bosa, whether he gets a sack or not, he has the same great hip discipline. He's always pointing his body at the quarterback, which helps him flatten around the corner or throw counter moves inside in a split second. And his hips are not the only thing that's disciplined. His hand usage, leverage, and power are all exceptional as well, as I mentioned before. Look no further than his sack against Jake Matthews in Week 7 for how all those elements of his game mesh together. Third quarter here on this rush, and even though Bosa's first step off the ball is relatively average, he still manages to get the corner on Matthews because of his leverage on the engagement and his hand usage after the fact. He's got such great pop to that initial punch, which knocks Matthews a bit off of his anchor, and then he uses that outside arm to neutralize Matthews' low hand. Once Bosa takes away that low hand, Matthews doesn't have anything to stop his momentum around the corner, so the gate starts to open up on him just a little bit. From there, Bosa finishes with a rip move through contact, and even though Matthews did finally get a hand on his chest, it was already way too late. There was no stopping him, and he was already on top of Matt Ryan for the sack. In my opinion, this takedown was not a product of athleticism or physical gifts, but rather from pure technical perfection and effort. Those are the two pillars of his game, and that aforementioned effort is yet another thing that's easy to appreciate about his tape. Bosa never ever quits on a play. His motor is running hot non-stop, and it helped him get no fewer than 4 extra sacks throughout his rookie campaign. Whether it was catching RG3 from behind when he was trying to scramble to the edge, or running down Derek Carr when he held the ball for almost 5 full seconds and refused to find his check down, this extra effort on every play was literally the difference between 6.5 sacks and 10.5 sacks with a Defensive Rookie of the Year trophy. It really did matter that much. But, and I say this with all sincerity, before we crown Bosa as the next big thing, we have to contextualize those 4 extra sacks properly. When you throw in another 2 freebie sacks where he was schemed untouched into the backfield on a stunt against the Buccaneers, as well as when he was left prematurely unblocked by the Panthers when they had a miscommunication in protection, that's a total of 6 sacks that were honestly what I consider to be low quality sacks. They were essentially cleanup sacks, coverage sacks, or scheme sacks. They were not the product of quickly beating a block or single-handedly overpowering a double team. By comparison, only 4.5 of his sacks in 2016 were of that high-quality variety. They were, in order, that sack against Matthews that you saw earlier, another sack from the Falcons game where he whipped Ryan Schrader off the snap and ran down Matt Ryan from behind. He also had a great counterspin inside against the Texans to get half a sack, and that counterspin got a lot better as the year went on, by the way. It's not the last time we'll see that. He had another sack a few weeks later against the Browns off a good counter move inside, and that was made possible by his hips always being flat to the quarterback, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier in this episode. And last but not least, he had yet another great counter spin move in Week 17 against the Chiefs to get his final sack of the season and put himself in double digits. Like I said, that counter spin really improved throughout the course of the season, and he started having a lot of success with it during the final few games. So that's 4.5 sacks out of 10.5 that were high quality, and the rest were low quality. You've seen every single one of these sacks by now, by the way. I did not leave any out over the course of this video. And to me, despite his excellent hand usage, hip discipline, leverage, and power, having 60% of your sack production be under rather fluky circumstances is worrying to me. Obviously, every good pass rusher is going to get some freebies every now and then, but really for Bosa to take the next step up in the NFL food chain, he's going to have to create more sacks immediately off the snap and not have his numbers be so inflated by stunts and cleaning up after others. Those kinds of, and I say this delicately, cheap production are not consistent enough to rely on. They're very circumstantial. I also realized that he did get a ton of pressures, but he wasn't converting enough of those pressures into actual sacks off of his own ability. You have to be able to more consistently get into the backfield earlier in the play rather than later in the play if you want to be considered an elite edge rusher. Being the cleanup crew can really only get you so far. And what worried me even more was that when Bosa was matched up with tackles, whether right or left, that were not only physically gifted but also had the technical prowess to match, he got completely shut down. Taylor Lewan is a good example of that. He's one of the more complete left tackles in the league right now, and Bosa could do absolutely nothing against him all game long. He ate Jack Conklin alive by comparison because even though Conklin showed a lot of potential in his first year, he still has a long way to go technique-wise. But Lewan's a whole different animal. You can't just swat his arms away and expect him to not have any counter punches already lined up. He's too experienced and too athletic for that to work. And in basically every rep that these guys went at it one-on-one, Bosa got dominated. Lewan was able to control his chest consistently either with his initial punch or with a counter punch against Bosa's first move, and that's what worries me. Bosa is not really physically gifted enough to just out-athlete a tackle like Lewan. He has to win with technique or he's not going to win at all. And that goes for any veteran tackle really, whether it was Donald Penn or Joe Thomas or even Tampa Bay's DeMar Dotson. When he's going against veteran tackles that know how to handle head fakes, how to neutralize punches, and how to power step inside and take away those inside counter moves, Bosa doesn't really have any other cards to play. He can't just be like JJ Watt or Khalil Mack or Von Miller and say, screw it, I'm quicker, faster, and stronger than you and there's nothing you can do about it. He's not a freak like those guys. If he doesn't win with technique, he's probably not going to win at all. That's why DeMar Dotson only lost 1 rep to him throughout that entire Bucs game when Bosa swatted his punch away and kind of forced a hands to the face penalty. But every other pass rush rep during that whole game, and there was a lot of them, they were all won by Dotson. He has a significant physical advantage over Bosa with size and length, and he's been around the league for a long time and knows how to use his hands. He plays with very good technique, which is really Bosa's only advantage over a lot of the younger tackles that don't know what they're doing yet. And because Bosa's not a freak, I think he might have a bit of a ceiling over him that other top-tier pass rushers don't. And to clarify that statement, I'm not saying that he can't put up consistent double-digit sack seasons, but it is significantly less likely that he will be that kind of player because of those physical limitations. That's why a lot of people were scratching their heads when he got picked 3rd overall in the first place, because even though everyone recognized that he did have an extremely high floor and he could be a productive pass rusher just off of technique and hustle alone, and to be fair, that's exactly what he was, but Bosa wasn't really seen as that transcendent physical talent that usually goes in that range in the draft. He's still a fantastic player and he's still a serious threat to rush the passer, but I guess my overarching point here is that we need to pump the brakes on the hype train just a little bit. In my opinion, he's not the next JJ Watt. He's not the next Mack, he's not the next Miller. Hell, I don't even think he's as naturally talented as his own teammate Melvin Ingram. If anything, I think he's the next Trent Cole or Tamba Hali. A consistently productive player every year that plays really hard, sets a tone on the field with hustle and physicality, and is an asset to his team on every single down. And just like Cole and Hali, he will have some games where he has a great matchup and he absolutely explodes on the stat sheet, but he's also going to have plenty of games where he does not have a good matchup and he'll completely disappear in pass rushing situations. That's just me being honest about what generally happens with players of Bosa's skill set. But don't confuse these criticisms or warnings with me thinking that he's a bad player. I do not think that he's a bad player. In fact, I love him as a player, and I think he's going to be around for a really long time. I just want to set some realistic expectations for his production going forward so that we don't get a ton of people wondering why he's not single-handedly wrecking offensive lines next season. Okay? Okay. Anyway, now that I made my piece on that, that's all I got for this week. As usual, on the screen are the names of all of this week's new Patreon supporters. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to everyone who has donated to keep the channel running. It's not always easy to make a living off of YouTube, especially when you have opinions that a lot of people don't agree with, but all of you new patrons are helping to make that a reality, and I cannot thank you enough. Next week, I'll be continuing this deep dive into last year's rookie class by taking a look at the player that I was convinced that the Chargers were going to draft over Bosa, and that's defensive end DeForest Buckner. He ended up going a few picks later to the 49ers at a big value. He's one of the highest graded 5-technique defensive ends that I've had coming out of college in the last few years. In fact, I think the only 5-technique that I've had a higher grade on since 2011 was Leonard Williams. So Buckner was way up there on the grading scale when he was in college, but he also had a great rookie campaign in the NFL just like Bosa did. We're going to break all that down, as well as where he fits in the Niners defense next season now that they're switching schemes from a 3-4 to a 4-3. So stay tuned for all of that next Thursday. Until then, later.